Okay, YouTube, what I've done is I've plugged in my USB drive and my SD card, and I've gone ahead and started it booting for the first time. And it does take a little while for it to get through and do its thing. See, there's the login, but you know, if you try to type anything in there, it's not quite done. I'm not really sure why they've got it set that way. But once you get to the point where it says reached target graphical interface, and it's just going to sit there because, well, we don't have a graphical interface installed. So you just hit enter. Oops, I'm on the wrong keyboard. Grab my other hardware. So you hit enter, and then it'll give you the login. So here's what we're going to do first. We're going to go ahead and log in. The login is root, and the password is also root. Now this is set by Arch Linux themselves when they put this out. This is just the defaults. I'm going to go ahead and clear the screen real quick. Now, at this point, the first thing we want to do is we're going to want to edit the command line. And basically, that's in the boot partition so that it tells it where, or as it's booting it, it's loading or directing where root is. We want to change that because we don't want to boot off of our SD card. We want to boot off the hard drive. Now, in order to do that, we need to take note of a couple things. We need to know the address. So let's do fdisk-l to list off everything on here. Now, if we look on here, we've got at the very top, what's listed is our SD card. And I know that because it shows the size of it as 7,888, or 84 rather, megabytes. Well, that's about an 8 gig card. That's the one that I was using before. So if I look down in there, the other way you can tell is SD cards will often be set up as MMCBLK, like this one is. MMCBLK0 is the device, and you'll notice that there's a P1, P2, P5. Those are the partitions. Okay. And what I want to do is also kind of go through that real quick. If you look all the way to the right, you'll see a column labeled System. Okay. If you look under that, W95 FAT32 is what P1 is listed as. Well, P1 is the boot partition. We're going to leave that alone. Don't mess with that at all because you still need that. That's actually the partition you need for the Pi to be able to boot. The second partition, which is P2, is listed as extended. Now that's the shell. You know, if you remember that from the previous video. Then P5 is actually where the operating system actually is. It's P5. Okay, so if you look at the 200, you look at the next partition, or rather drive, it lists as dev SDA. Now that's very important, but it also shows it as 250 gigabytes. I know without a doubt that is my hard drive because my hard drive is 250 gigs. So you look down there below, and these are all things you want to take note of also for when we're actually setting our fstat. And as well as we're going to go through and we're going to set this command line, we need to know where to point it. So SDA1 is listed as under, if you look under the system column again, W95 FAT32. That is the copy of the boot partition that was put on there. That was the one that we said we weren't going to use, but we just wanted to leave it alone, right? So SDA1 we're not even going to use. SDA2 is the extended. Again, it's that shell that we made quite a bit bigger. SDA3, this is ironic because remember we put the swap file at the end of the drive, yet it lists it as the third partition when actually it's the very end partition, which is kind of funny how they got it set up. So another reason why you want to double check. But SDA3 is our swap partition. You can tell that by looking under the system column. It says Linux swap. Now, SDA5 and SDA6 are the two partitions that were made or that reside within the shell, within the extended partition, that shell I was talking about before. Now, how can you tell which one has the operating system and which one is the one we created for the home directory? Easy enough. Look at your start and end columns. Well, when we wrote the image was initially written on the hard drive exactly the same way it was done on the SD card. So with the operating system on it. So we know that came first. And then we added, after we extended it out, we added a secondary partition, or a second partition with the remainder, right, for the home directory. So we know that came afterward. So if you look at the start and end times, or start locations and end locations, and I believe these are in blocks, or rather sectors, I'm not sure. But if you look at SDA5, it starts at 1884.16. And it ends at 102.586.367. At least that's how it is on mine. And SDA 6 starts at 102.588.514. Well, we know that SDA 5 actually came first, so that's the one with the operating system. You can also see it under blocks that it's much smaller. That makes sense. So when we go to point this in our command line, we need to point it and say root is at SDA 5. So let's go ahead and do that. How you do that? You open up Nano, which is an editor. It's a command line editor, or it's an editor that you can use in the terminal. And then where we're going to go to is boot cmdline.txt. Okay, that's the name of the file and that's the location. So we're going to go ahead and hit enter, and it will take us here. Okay. The only thing we need to change, of course, is where root is pointed. So we're going to go all the way over here to where it says root equals dev mmcblk 0p5. Now, right now, that is pointing to the number 5 partition on the SD card. Okay? I'll make sure everybody followed that, because we just looked all that information up. That's where it's pointing to. So we're going to change this, and we're going to say, no, don't use the SD card. Point it to SDA5. Because that's the operating system on our hard drive. Okay? So we're going to go ahead and tell it to do that. We'll hit Control O to save it, and then Control X to get out. All right? Now when you go to save it, it'll ask you for confirmation, so you hit Control O, and then you'll hit Enter, and then it'll tell you it wrote one line. Great. Then you Control X to get back to your root prompt. Okay? Clear this out. Okay, now that we've done that, what we want to do is we want to reboot. Okay? And the reason is when it reboots, it's going to boot up and hopefully point, and it'll boot the operating system from the hard drive, and we'll be working within the hard drive. So I'm going to go ahead and reboot, and it takes just a few seconds, but I think what you're going to see is it's going to load up quite a bit faster than it did before, because now we're actually going to be booting off the hard drive rather than, or rather running off the hard drive rather than the SD card. So I can see the LED light on my hard drive, my external hard drive there, is flickering, and there it is. Okay, so now we're good to go ahead and hit enter and log back in as root. So now the thing to remember now is now we are actually using the file system, the operating system, on the hard drive, which, you know, try to keep that straight in your head. Now that's what we did. We're no longer on the SD card. We're on the hard drive. Okay? So the files that we're going to be dealing with are actually on the hard drive. All right? So now what I want to do is, the first thing I want to do is I want to get my home partition ready to go. So I'm going to do, I've got to basically format it into ext4, because remember, we didn't do that. When we created the partition, we just created the partition, but we did not format the file system. So what I want to do is I want to, just to make sure, mkfs.ext4, and I'm going to point that to dev SDA6. And there, it's going through, and it's creating the file system. And this is a good thing to do just in case. It doesn't take real long to do it. There, it's done. One thing we're also going to want to do is we're also going to want to get our swap file going. Because right now, it's not even set. We haven't done the make swap yet. So that's what we're going to do next. We're going to do mkswap, if I can spell it right, not W, mkswap. All right? And then we're going to point it to dev SDA3, because that was our swap partition, right? Now it's going to go through and it's going to do it. There, it's done. Now we're going to have to turn it on. So we're going to go swap on, one word, SWAPON, and then point it at dev SDA3 to turn it on. Now it's on. Okay, great. What I kind of want to do is, let me check also, let me do a CF disk dev, and what I want to do is I want to look at my SD card. Now that my SD card is not being really used at this point, MMC, it was MMC BLK 0, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, there it is. I want to see if it'll let me do this. See, here's what we got. We've got the partition 1, which is the boot partition. We have to leave that one alone. But partition 5, remember, it was the command line file we just edited was pointing here at MMCBLK 0P5 as the root partition. So what I want to do, just because, you know, is I want to delete it. Okay, so I'm going to go over here to delete. Now it's gone. Okay, now I haven't written it yet. I don't even know if it'll let me write it yet. But right now, I've got 7,788.83 megabytes of free space. So I'm going to create a new partition with that, with all that space. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Now you can see it lists it as, interestingly, still partition 5, but I'm going to try to write it. See if it'll let me write it. Okay, now it says wrote partition, but no partitions are marked bootable. It says DOS MBR cannot boot this to update the table. Well, you know, there's things you can do. If you really wanted to go up here, you could effectively make the boot file bootable. You know, I mean, it's probably going to give you an error or two. Let's go ahead and try. Yeah, wrote partition table, but reread table failed. And that's because you have to reboot. So that's what we're going to do now, is we're going to X out, or not X out, we have to go over here to quit. Okay? But we're also going to need, once we reboot, we're going to need to format that new partition. So let's do a reboot real quick. And let it come back up. Which it should load much faster. Yeah, it loads a lot faster than it did before. But we haven't even done anything really that's been intensive yet, so we'll actually see even more a little bit later. Okay, so I'm going to log back in as root. Password is root. Okay, now let's go ahead and let's see if we can format that. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to do mkfs.ext4, and I want to point it to dev mmcblk0. Well, you know what? Let's double check, because now that it rewrote, let's do an fdiskl just to be on the safe side. Okay, well, it is showing that P5. It shows that there's an extended and a P5. So what I also want to do is I want to go back in and I want to check that. Yeah. Okay, everything is the way it's supposed to be, and it's going to be partition 5 that we're going to handle, or format, essentially. Okay, let's try that again. mkfs.ext4, see if it'll let us do it. Dev mmcblk0p5. Oh, and it is actually going to do that. So what we're doing now is we're actually rewriting that file system, essentially formatting that new partition on the SD card. We got rid of the partition that contained the Arch Linux operating system on it. We got rid of it, and then we created a new partition that encompassed all the free extra space. So now we have a drive that we can actually use to store information on. We just have to make sure it's mounted and usable from the hard drive, which is what we're going to do next. Okay, so if I do an F disk again, /L or -L. Okay, now it shows that it's ready to go. All right, now here's what we need to do next. Okay, now that we've got, we've fixed the command line, we've formatted SDA6 for our home directory, we've turned the swap on, we've now created the proper file as far as a new partition on the hard drive, so we can use that other 7.5 gigs, or almost, yeah, about 7.5 gigs. What I need to do now is I need to have a place. Yeah, that's a good thing to do. I need to have a place to mount that. So what I want to do is I want to CD to the root directory. So CD/. If I do an ls, look through here, I've created, what I did is I did this just a little bit ago, is I created the SD directory that you'll see right there. It's the very first one. But that is, I created that directory so that I could have a place to mount that new partition on the SD card. Okay, so what I want to do now is I want to go in, and now I'm going to change the fstab. Okay, so I'm going to nano into etc fstab. All right, which will take me here. Now in this file, this is where you can actually mount all your drives and partitions. So the first one I want to mount is SDA5. Just, you might not even have to do this, but I'm going to. And I'm going to mount this at root. Okay? Just for redundancy's sake. And it's an ext4 is the type. Defaults is what we'll use for options. The dump and the pass we're going to set as 0. Then we're also going to do dev SDA6, because we set that was supposed to be our home directory. So we're going to set that at /home. That's where it's going to be mounted. And then set that also as an X4, which is what it is. Defaults 0, 0. And then we're also going to mount SDA3 as our swap. Now, what directory to mount it in? It's a swap, so there is none. So just type in none here. And then under the type of file, it is a swap. So you'll type in swap. Everything else you can leave the same, defaults, and then 0 for the dump, 0 for the pass. And now I want to also mount the MMC BLK 0P, and this is saying 0P5 is what the partition is. That's for that partition on the SD card. And I'm going to mount that in SD, because that was the directory that I created. Now you do have to create a directory, someplace to mount it. I kind of did it earlier when I was trying all this out, and I forgot to get rid of it before I reshot the video. But this is how you do it. Anyway, just make sure you make the directory. And that, to make a directory, it's mkdir. Make sure you're in the right folder, or rather root. If you're in the root directory, if to get there, it's cd space / enter, and that'll take you to your actual root directory, not the root directory itself, not the root folder, but the root of the partition, essentially. And from there, you'll use mkdir and whatever you want to call it to create your file, or your directory, your folder. For here, this is also ext4, defaults 0, 0, enter. Now we're all done. I'm going to Control-O to save it, hit enter, and then Control-X out of it. Now we should be all finished. Reboot, and what we hopefully will see is everything saying that everything is mounted where it's supposed to be. Everything is being used the way it should be. Okay, now we're looking to see if everything got mounted. It looks like it is. I see SD, boot, SD, there's mounting home, the target swap. Everything looks like it went the way it was supposed to. So now you notice how fast it came up. Hit enter. And from this point, this is where you can actually go in, and this is where we're going to pick it up on the next video. We'll go in and we'll start setting our locations and get our desktop environment installed. So that will be it for this video. You may notice that I did have to cut it. My DSLR will only actually record 20 minutes at a time, and I ran just a hair long. So I picked it back up from the reboot. So I did cut that back in. But in any case, yeah, it booted up. Everything's good. We're ready to go. So like I said, on the next video, we're going to go through. We're going to set our locations. We're going to finish the install and get our Pi running the way it needs to be going. So with that, let's cut the video, and I'll catch you on the next one. Thank you very much for watching.